On today's Baker Mashup, we're reviewing the Artillery Hornet. So on today's Baker Mashup, we are reviewing the Artillery Hornet. Now this is a budget entry-level printer with a 220 by 220 by 250 build volume, and it's a really nice looking printer. It's driven towards educational uses. Artillery said that they're trying to break into more educational printers, and I spent a good amount of time reviewing this printer, checking it out, doing some prints, and I think I am pretty pleased with the results. So today what we're going to be doing is going through our standard review process, and we'll be putting it through its paces, and then at the end I'll be giving you a summary of my thoughts on the Artillery Hornet and whether or not you should buy one. So with all that said, let's get to work. Like most commercial printers, the Artillery Hornet is extremely well packaged. There's foam everywhere, and I would never be concerned about ordering one of these directly from China. This one came via DHL, and it is very well packed and arrived in perfect condition. As we unpack this, we've got the usual suspects. However, there is something unique in this box that I'm excited to try, and that is the Bowden tube that is integrated directly with the wiring that goes to the main carriage. As you can see here, this Bowden tube goes right through the center. It is a little bit long, but we'll test this out and see how things shake up. Like most of these budget printers, it comes pre-assembled to a large degree. We'll remove the top half of the printer here, and then in this little side pocket we find that they have unattached the main carriage, so we'll pull that out, and then finally the full bottom half of the 3D printer. This is pretty heavy, but I really like the look of this printer as they've added some injection molded plastic, and we'll see how that performs with this printer. I did notice that the uprights had some sort of plastic or webbing on here, and it just rubbed off. I don't know if that was from the packing material or something at the factory. A bit unusual, but it didn't cause any problems coming off of the 3D printer. Now that we have it out of the box, we can see here that we've got some really nice injection molded plastic on the front and rear of the printer. I was very impressed with the stability of this plastic. It didn't feel cheap or rushed. It really did feel like a solid piece of the 3D printer itself. Artillery did say that this printer was targeted towards more of an educational market, and I think these bright colors will certainly help to engage children in 3D printing. I was glad to see that there was a paper manual included with the 3D printer. I think this is something that's especially important on entry-level printers, and it does cover in quite a bit of detail exactly how to assemble the printer. For an entry-level user or an educator not familiar with 3D printers, this should still be relatively easy to assemble. Artillery did include wrenches to assemble the printer, but given that I've done this a few times, I'm going to use my own and speed the process up a little bit. Assembling the top half of the printer went a lot smoother than many others, and the reason for this is because they have that plastic injection molding. By attaching the uprights and just going ahead and putting it slightly over the edge of the table, it's very easy to go ahead and install the screws that hold the uprights. Once we have both sides completed, we assemble the spool holder, which simply snaps right into place. Next, we have just a couple of plugs at the bottom of the printer to put together. The main wiring loom snaps into place really easily. You just take the cable and snap it in, and it's got an extra set of teeth to hold everything securely. I like the way Artillery set this up. The next part is the carriage assembly. This goes really quick. There's 3 M3 screws, and then you just attach the hot end and all of the carriage to the carriage plate here, tighten it securely, and this step is done. Now we're going to attach the Bowden tube. This is a keyed connector. You're going to insert the Bowden tube into the hole there and then make sure that the rest of this connector fits securely in place, and then just tighten up the base thumb screw. Takes a little bit of effort there, but it's pretty easy to assemble. Next, you'll repeat the process for the extruder side. We're just going to insert the Bowden tube and then look for the key, and then just tighten the thumb screw on the bottom. The final step is to make sure that all of the wheels that are part of this 3D printer are tight and up against all of the extrusion. You may need to tighten some of the cam bolts on the extruder, or you'll tighten ones on the side, and then there's also a set of them underneath for the heat bed. You want to make sure there's no play anywhere in any of the extrusion or the carriage. Now that we have everything assembled, it's time to power on the printer and level our bed. The Artillery manual suggests that I start with leveling corners, but I opted for hard mode and went with the 9-point leveling, which should result in a much more accurate bed leveling mesh. The 9-point leveling process is pretty simple. Marlin menus walk you through the entire process. You'll use a manual bed leveling tool or index card, and then turn the wheel to adjust each of the 9 points on the bed, making sure that the nozzle is just starting to grab the index card. Once you've leveled all 9 points, you'll want to make sure that your G-code startup in Cura or whatever slicer you're using is using the M420 S1 command to load the mesh in after the G28 command in your startup sequence. The Artillery website has the G-code startup and ending commands, as well as a Cura profile, so it's rather easy to get this printer up and running. Alright, so let's give a rating to the Artillery Hornet for its assembly. Overall, this went better than some assemblies I've done. We didn't have to tilt the printer on its side. The thumb screws made attaching the cable to the carriage extremely easy, and there was only 2 other plugs. The worst of the entire process was tightening the cam bolts on the heat bed itself, and that went relatively smooth. Overall, I'm going to give the assembly on this printer a 9. For our first print, we're going to use the test cube that was supplied by Artillery on the 2 GB SD card, which was surprisingly large for such a small and economical printer. And as you can see, our first results were pretty decent. I can see a little bit of banding in this print here, but overall, I think it's a more than acceptable first print. After a first successful print, I decided to print a very large vase to test out the build volume of the printer overall. I printed this vase using Cura, and I also used the Artillery supplied Cura profiles. Now, I did select the spiralized outer contour, but aside from that, I'm using the fine setting, and their fine setting did a pretty good job. You can see some of the noise generated by the steppers and the stepper drivers. Unlike a lot of other 3D printers, this one has no problem reaching the full 250mm build height. I've reviewed a number of other 3D printers where the maximum build height causes the filament path to become twisted and bent, which could cause a breakage and a print failure. This one, having the roll at the front of the printer on the bottom, makes it easy to get up to that full build height without any problems. I was pleased to find a geared extruder on this entry-level printer. Most entry-level printers like an Ender 3 or an Ender 3 V2 don't generally have geared extruders, which means you shouldn't have any skip steps from the extruder. The front display is a traditional graphic display that you'll find on most entry-level printers. There's no touchscreen and it uses a knob, which I actually prefer because it makes accessing Marlin menus much easier. The SD card is located right next to the display for easy access, so I think this is a design well done. The heat bed relief looks pretty solid here, and I didn't notice any rubbing of the cable up against the back of the printer or the limit switch that's located nearby. This design also includes Artillery's anti-backlash connector. I've not really seen any positive effects of this. However, Artillery does boast this as a patented function and feature of their 3D printers. Now, the one thing I did notice on the back of this printer that was interesting is that the white port that you see at the top appears to be for bed leveling, so there could be a possibility of expanding this to add a BL touch. Looking under the hood, you can see an Artillery Ruby board, which is a proprietary board created by Artillery. This board doesn't look as if it sports too many features, but it does have a 32-bit Cortex M4 running at 84 megahertz. These drivers appear to be TMC 2100s, which means that it's using the old version of Stealth Chop. The other thing that I'm not real pleased with in here is all the glue on every single component. I'm sure that helps with shipping, but certainly makes upgrading more difficult. However, all things considered, I think this is a properly classed main board and display for this entry-level 3D printer. The Hornet has a glass bed, and you're going to need a scraper to get any of the prints off the printer. In my opinion, the glass bed is the least attractive feature of this 3D printer. The glass appears to be permanently mounted to the aluminum build plate underneath. This results in non-uniform heating across the build surface, and it locks you into this glass plate and makes adding a flexible build surface much more difficult. I would have preferred Artillery to make the glass surface something you could remove, like I've seen on many other 3D printers I've reviewed. So let's talk about the Artillery Hornet features and quality. I want to say that the quality of this printer is very high. I like everything about it. The injection molded plastic really adds a nice touch to this 3D printer, and as I said before, I think it's very engaging, and if this is going to be targeted in an educational environment, I think the looks play a big part in that educational environment for getting children inspired into 3D printing. Keeping in mind that this is an entry-level printer, it's not going to have every single bell and whistle that is available for 3D printers. With that said, there are a number of things that I like beyond the molded plastic. There is a very easy assembly to this printer. I do like the cable where the Bowden tube is completely integrated. There's easy access to the Marlin menus with the SD card. It's where it belongs. And manual bed leveling was enabled by default, which should give me improved first layer results on my 3D prints. This printer also comes with a geared extruder, silent steppers, and easy access to the filament change because it's right at the front of the printer. The 32-bit mainboard runs the most recent copy of Marlin, and should you want to upgrade it, this board looks like it could be easily replaced with something more generic like an SKR. The major downside of this 3D printer is the glass bed. You're committed to a glass bed, and while you might be able to put a polycarbonate sheet on top, you're now adding an additional layer that has to be heated in order for your 3D prints to stick. Adding a PEI sheet also makes this more committed, as you're not going to be able to access the glass bed. So it would have been better if Artillery would have included a glass bed that was removable on top of the aluminum one that they already have there. I think the print quality would be much improved with a dual Z. However, the single Z does make it more of an economical printer. The only other issue I had with this printer was the amount of glue on the inside. This really does make it so it's harder to upgrade the printer overall. Considering this is an entry-level printer, I will have to rate the features and quality a 9. I think Artillery could have knocked this out of the park with a 10 if they would have chose to make the glass bed something you could have removed from the aluminum plate. The first print went extremely well, printing Artillery's test cube, and for that I'll give the first print a 10. Now let's talk about the overall print quality. I think the Artillery profiles work extremely well when you're using it in fine mode. The other modes that they have, which are normal and fast, do not work as well, and they did introduce a far larger number of imperfections in the prints. Comparing these two benches, you can see I tried to slow things down a bit in reducing the acceleration of the 3D prints and also the overall speed, but it made a little difference in the overall print quality. I only had this problem when it was on larger layer heights. Fine mode worked really well, and as you can see, these prints came out very nice. However, this is a budget educational printer, and I don't think that most people in a classroom setting are going to be complaining nearly as much as to these small artifacts that you're finding in these 3D prints. I'm sure most of these artifacts could be removed with a little bit of time and effort in the slicer settings, so overall, I'm going to give the print quality an 8. This printer looks like you should be able to replace the main board, add a BL Touch, and perform a number of other upgrades on this 3D printer. With all that said, I'm going to give the upgradability an 8. This 3D printer is something that you could certainly tinker with. It can be used as a tool, so I think there's a lot of flexibility here. So I'm going to rate the class of this printer as a tinkerer printer, as I feel that there's a lot of things that you could do to it that would improve its overall function and capabilities as an entry-level printer. This gives the printer an overall rating of an 8.8, or when rounded, a 9. Okay, so let's kind of summarize what we've talked about here today. So I really like the Artillery printer here. I think compared to something like the Sidewinder X1, this particular printer really ticked a lot of boxes for me. And the one thing I liked in this was it had a 32-bit main board. Sidewinder didn't. It still has a glass bed, which I'm not terribly happy with, but I think if that's the only problem with this printer, overall, it's something that you can deal with. You could certainly use a polypropylene build surface on here. It's still a little bit of inconsistent heating, but as a 3D printer user, you'll fine-tune and understand exactly what heat level works best for getting your prints to stick to the bed. The part that I don't like about the glass bed is it's just that you're locked into it. But all other things considered, I really like this printer. The injection molded plastic is really solid on this. It's not flimsy. It's a very tough printer. I did love the fact that it's got a geared extruder. The cord here for connecting to the carriage is rather impressive. I really like the fact that it's all enclosed in one wire. Matter of fact, I would love to see a manufacturer come out with something like this that's more universal, so that way you could use this for not just this 3D printer, but other 3D printers. So I really like this as part of the Bowden design. I think that the long Bowden tube here does represent a little bit of issue with the retraction. The default artillery profile for the Hornet is a 6mm retraction. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but the problem with the 6mm retraction is it does take longer to retract 6mm than, say, a direct drive of 1mm. So your prints are going to take a little bit longer, but again, looking at this from the school perspective, most of the time, anybody that starts up a print like this isn't going to be trying to finish it in the class hour. They're going to start a print, the students will come back the next day, and for the most part, most prints will be done. So not a big deal, but just something to keep in mind if you're purchasing this for your own use as home users. And I think this is a great home machine as well. The other thing I really liked about this printer is it really did all of the things that it should have done for an entry-level printer, but didn't try to wow the user. Now, what I mean by that is, let's talk about that front display there. So you've got just a traditional graphic controller display on there, right? There's no touchscreen, there's no frills, but it gets the job done. And things like the Ender V1 had a display like this, and it was an incredibly successful printer. The other thing I like is the fact that the SD card is there right in the front. It's a full-size SD card, and it's very intuitive. You know that that SD card slots in right there, and then you've got your display. So from a student perspective of taking their print from a slicer and putting it over onto the 3D printer, very intuitive, very easy to use. The other thing I really liked about this printer was the reel was down here in the front of the printer, which gave an excellent filament path. So many other printers, they put them on the top, and then it gets wound around, and there's a lot of different path issues for that filament that becomes a problem. Now, the one thing I didn't like about this path is really just the use of this geared extruder as an end user. So when you're in the front of the machine and you're opening up this geared extruder to feed filament, it's intuitive that you're pulling this towards you. So it's not just pulling it straight to the side. Now, I've heard reports of these extruders having issues as far as breaking and needing to be replaced. I didn't have any of those sort of problems with this, but that's something to absolutely be concerned about, is making sure that this doesn't get broken. So maybe limiting children in changing filament might be a good idea there. But as an adult, I could certainly not make sure that I'm not pulling this lever in the wrong direction. So other things I liked with this printer was that it is a pretty compact printer. You can replace the mainboard if you wanted to replace the mainboard on this. There's so many different options of what you could do for upgrading. You could even do more aesthetic upgrades here too. The first thing I thought when seeing this was that it was great that Artillery had a nice yellow front and back. You could easily 3D print covers here. You could add storage to the side of the printer here. So this is completely open over here. You could print a drawer and have that slide in there. I've seen other things like the Ender V2 that has drawer and storage on here, but you could easily 3D print one yourself, and it's a great add-on for the printer. So I think there's a lot of upgrades with this printer as well. Now, when we talk about the print quality of what you're going to get out of this printer, I did have some mixed results, but I'm going to also preface that with saying that I think most of the mixed results I got were because I just took Artillery slicer profile, and I really didn't spend a lot of time after that. So I took their profile and I did a number of 3D prints. Fine mode came out really well. This face looks as good as I would expect it to become. Things like this Mohai, this here came out pretty well. You can see at some of the corners here that we ran into just a little bit of slicer where it didn't really join the seam very well. But that's all configurable in the slicer. Same thing with this cat. There's a terrible seam right up the middle here that you can see. But overall, the print quality really came out pretty well. The benchies I had a little bit more of a trouble with. I think it is the increased layer height, but again, I think those are slicer settings. So overall, quality-wise, I think it's very acceptable. Certainly more than acceptable for a school environment. So if this is going to be used as a teaching aid or for a science class where kids can print out different things, I would have no hesitation recommending this printer. And as an entry-level 3D printer user, I would recommend this as well. I really like this over printers like, let's say, the Ender 3 V2. Now, why would I recommend that? Well, here's why. This has a geared extruder on here, and most of the time, the first thing people upgrade on their Ender is going to be the extruder, because you're going to end up skipping steps with a traditional extruder. So I'm always a fan of the direct drive or more of the geared extruders on here. It's just much better quality of prints that come out with it, and you don't end up with skip steps. Now, the nozzle in that, just a standard nozzle on there, nothing to write home about, but you could easily replace that and upgrade that as well. The main board could be upgraded on this printer as well. Just so many different ways that you can tinker with this printer as an entry-level 3D printer user and kind of learn with this printer. So I really think Artillery did a great job. My only complaint, which we talked about, was really the glass bed and just being committed to that. So overall, I would recommend this printer, and if anyone was going to buy one of these, this would be my recommendation over something like an Ender 3. And I've owned Ender 3s. They're great printers. But this one seems to have a few more features that I really liked. I do like the Marlin display on here much better than the touchscreen. I just think it gives you more flexibility, and the fact that it's just running Marlin, you can upgrade it, add features, you can do a lot with it. The main board is a little bit underpowered. It works fine for the printer, but again, this is an entry-level unit. I wouldn't expect a higher-end processor in it, and having a Cortex M4 running at 84 megahertz, more than enough for this printer. So I really think this is a good buy. It's about $279 on Amazon. I've got links down in the description. You can save a little bit of money ordering overseas. That certainly will save a few bucks. But yeah, it's definitely a great printer, and I definitely recommend it. So with that is going to bring the end of today's video. If you liked it, make sure you mash that like button and don't forget to share and subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to help support the channel, consider checking out our Patreon page, where patrons get early access to a lot of the different content and can talk directly with me at almost any time in our channel Discord, and links for all that are down in the description. So with that, I'm going to say thanks again for watching, and we'll see you all next time.